All right, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to I Am The Cavalry. This is Coordinated Disclosure of ICS Products. Who's got time for that? And our speaker is Angus. Before we get started, just want to do a couple of quick announcements. Number one, we'd like to thank our sponsors, especially our Inner Circle sponsors, Critical Stack and Valamail, and our stellar sponsors, Amazon, BlackBerry, the NSA, Cylance, Microsoft, Robinhood, Secure Code Warrior, and Paranoids. It's their support along with our other sponsors, donors, and volunteers that make this event possible. All these talks are being recorded and streamed online, so if you could please silence your cell phones. And that's it. I'll hand it over to our speaker.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm Angus with an organization formerly known as ICS CERT, also formerly known as the NKIC, and currently known as CISA, the Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency. I like to say we're twice the security now, but we are still doing vulnerability disclosure and kind of talk about that a little bit here. So just a quick rundown of me. There's been a little bit of confusion, but yes, that's me. I've been a federal employee for about 15 years now, and I've been doing cybersecurity for most of that. Currently, I'm the federal lead for the ICS Vulnerability Disclosure Program within CISA, and hopefully get into that in a little more detail later. But I'll be here for the rest of BSides, and also I'm going to be at DEF CON. I'm going to be in the aviation village, so it'd be really awesome if you came by and chatted me up a little bit. There's some cool things going on over there. Also, another way to encourage folks to come see me, if you have ever disclosed an ICS vulnerability through the NKIC or ICS CERT, I have NKIC coins, because we don't have CISA coins yet, but I have coins for you because it's the least I can do to appreciate the good work that you've done coordinating disclosure through us. So, and if all else fails and you just want to stop by and chat in general, give you a couple of cues. Yes, this is me, and I'll tell you about my Jeep. And I have a dog that actually used to work for DHS, so that's a good story there. But that's fun stuff. All right. So what is coordinated disclosure? I just went straight to the CERT guide to try to, wrangle up a few key things that I think that's important to this. The number one item is just reduce harm, right? So working with industrial control systems and recognizing the function that they have in our day-to-day lives, this is should always be the most important thing when you're okay. All right. Well, all right. Is that better? Yes, sir. All right. Okay. So working with industrial control systems, we want to reduce harm by reducing risk here, right? So this should always be the most important element of your disclosure with an ICS element. I do recognize that I cannot personally reduce risk of vulnerabilities, but I can give asset owners the information about risk. We have a pretty wide audience that we can advertise this to. Can't force them to read it, right? But I want to make it public knowledge and out there for them to make the decision point on there. Most importantly, during this process, I want to presume benevolence, right? I don't care how or where you found this vulnerability. I want you to know that my goal is not to call the feds on anybody. I want you to know that I believe you're bringing this information to light with the best of intentions. You may get pushback here and there, but you want the vendor to understand the risk and to take action to fix the vulnerability for their customer base, right? If you have something and you feel like you can't trust me, just get a throwaway email address. Come on, just we can get this information to be public, even through anonymous means. I still want to talk to you, and I still want to convey risk to the larger crowd. And to the vendors, both large and small, I don't really think that this is the crowd, but stop calling your lawyers. That they don't scare me. And you shouldn't be intimidating researchers that are out there that are doing this work on behalf of you, really, whether you like it or not. The vendors know this, but it doesn't seem to stop them, right? DHS, with that, has excellent legal counsel. And when you bring, as a vendor, bring your lawyer to the table, I'm obligated to bring my lawyers to the table. So let's just not go there. Let's not deal with that, right? I do caveat that with, if I have a suspicion that there is some kind of criminal activity, I may be obligated to provide that to law enforcement at some point, but that's not my primary function. I want to publicly disclose 0 days that impact industrial control systems to as wide an audience as possible. So one of the key tenets that can be difficult for us to manage at times is avoiding surprises. As a researcher, you know that we're going to have to talk to the vendor at some point. They're the only one that can fix this, right? No matter how terrible you have proven their product to be, we want to put this information in their hand before it's public knowledge. And things can get contentious at times, and that's okay, but that does not mean that you should go silent and then go out and go public and just kind of run these organizations, these vendors through the mud. So I take a lot of heartburn with folks when they leak this information in advance. So that doesn't help the process, right? It doesn't help the vendor when they're doing this again and again later on, because if you can find one vulnerability in a product, I guarantee you there's a lot more in there. So think about yourself, understand what your goals are, but don't throw the rest of the research community under the bus by leaking the information in advance. So what's not up here? I kind of summed up the FUDs here. We have, what's not here is fear. Vulnerabilities can be scary to the uninitiated. Don't get mad if you get a low CVSS score. Not all vulnerabilities are scored the same. But it doesn't make it less valuable in my eyes. I want to get you a CVE. I want to get it a public knowledge. But just don't overstate the impact. Simply so that you can get more press coverage. That's not helping anybody. I want you to be a reliable voice for the ICS community, for all of vulnerability disclosure. Don't cause uncertainty. This is hard to work around at times. Both the vendors and the researchers kind of love to play this card, but right? This is a 0 day. We've not seen this before to a certain extent, so nobody knew, and here we are. But if there are more vulnerabilities to be found, go find them. Don't make these broad strokes of, this could be and might be. Stick to the facts, right? So doubt, if you question the vendor's intention when you are disclosing to them, don't think they're taking you seriously, and you start giving them grief, throwing them shade, right? Don't expect them to suddenly be nice, right? These are human beings too. Let the facts of the vulnerability speak for itself, and stick to the facts. I can't say that enough. If you can show potential of cascading effects for these ICS vulnerabilities, do it. That's great. We'll take you serious either way. And I go back and forth on this last point, but the self-promotion aspect of it, I always want to attribute a researcher to a vulnerability. That's the only currency I have is my good name, or the good name of DHS. So I want to do that. It doesn't matter the scenario. Even if you've done everything wrong for the disclosure process, we're still going to attribute the discovery of the vulnerability to you. Just don't make it so hard for us to do that. If you can't follow we have at times not attributed disclosure to a researcher when they haven't followed the process very well and have been difficult to work with. But that's very rare, and it's not something I take a lot of pride in doing, because it is your good work that you're doing on behalf of these vendors, whether they like it or not. But yeah, so some things to think about is, what is, as a researcher, what is your disclosure policy? You get to make that call, right? So from my perspective, no two disclosures are really ever the same. And my boss likes to describe the disclosure process as everybody holds guns on each other and nobody publishes till everybody publishes, right? And sometimes folks jump the gun on us there when we're kind of in our standoff. So what kind of helps prevent folks from jumping the gun in this process is your opportunity to signal what your intentions are going into a disclosure. If you have a policy that you can communicate up front with the vendor, they kind of get a sense of what your goal is and how serious you are. And from the ICS perspective, things are definitely maturing quite a bit. I know a lot of software companies have product certs, but these are becoming more common in the ICS realm. This wasn't necessarily the story in recent history. And you have to recognize all of these P-certs operate at different levels within the organization. So that can be a challenge at times when you show up with a vulnerability and you're contacting the help desk and they're trying to convey it to the P-cert that's completely in the wrong part of the organization, and they're conveying it up to the CISO who may not actually be a part of the executive suite. So there's challenges there, and you got to know your target. You're doing a lot of research leading up to that, and these are things that you should know. So for CISA, our policy within the ICS realm for public disclosure is that we will release after 45 days. And that's not exactly what it is, right? We release 45 days from the last time we had contact with, say, the vendor. So if you're a vendor, it behooves you in this process to be communicating on a regular basis and really showing what your the work and the process that you're going through to remediate these findings. I don't take a lot of pride in making a publication that has no statement from the vendor, and we send it out to probably about 30,000 subscribers, and no one has any kind of remediation to a vulnerability. But suddenly after that happens, a vendor comes to the table shortly thereafter and is very interested in trying to give us an effective way to remediate the finding. It's just kind of funny how that works sometimes. So I kind of tried to poll some of our ICS vendors that we work with to see what their disclosure policies look like, and it just varies for every vendor. There was no consistency there. It's a 60 to 90 day disclosure window for a lot of them. The more mature vendors in the IT realm, kind of like in the IT realm, are focused publicly disclosing once there's a patch. Many recognize this isn't always the case and will publicly disclose a vulnerability and reference compensating controls. So that's always scary when a vendor does that for an ICS system, but if you're doing your ICS networks correctly, they should be segmented off in advance to, prevent the risk from some of these vulnerabilities. And sometimes as a researcher, you can't always expect a patch to be ready to go. There is, sometimes we encounter end-of-life products. So that's like a huge issue in the ICS realm because these systems will be put in place for 20 and 30 years, right? They're just not supported by the manufacturer anymore. So what do? We're still giving CVEs to these vulnerabilities. We're helping and hoping that the assignment of these CVEs to these at-risk systems, even though they're end of life, can still maybe influence an asset owner how important it is for them to go out and try to replace these systems. So, and then for researchers' policies, that always comes back to you, right? This is where I kind of hope you take into consideration some of the factors that went into your discovery, right? How long did it even take you to discover the vulnerability? Would it be unfair for you to discover a vulnerability and say it took you a year to work up and discover it, to expect a vendor to have it fixed in a few weeks? I don't know. It just depends on the vulnerability, right? And you probably, by this point, have some pretty good insight into the product. How hard is it, do you think, to remediate the vulnerability? And what are the impacts of your findings? Is this a medical device? Is this something that could have an immediate life safety risk? And some of the next couple slides I kind of present kind of give you some ideas of how you should pick what your policy is for the disclosure process. All right, so this is the Purdue model here, and I was curious, this is pretty common knowledge to me, but who in here is familiar with the Purdue model? Okay, awesome. So this is kind of something that's real common in the operational technology area, the ICS realm. It's a reference model that's been through a few iterations. It started out, I think it came to fruition in the 90s. It's also known as ISA 95. But essentially this model presents the ideal interconnection of discrete enterprise components between the IT and the ICS network. So we start at the top. We've got our basic kind of boundary systems, our usual IT stuff that we're all familiar with. On the level 4, these are our more enterprise IT services that we deal with kind of as your desktop, your day-to-day work. And once we kind of move down to level 3, we move away from a typical CIA triad, and it kind of gets flipped around, and our availability becomes a priority as we enter into this kind of cross a DMZ into the OT environment. And so level 3 is where we start seeing operational components of the environment. Some of our historians, HMIs, these traditional high-level systems that we have in the OT world. And we move on to level 2, and this is where we start seeing proprietary ICS type protocols here, Modbus, DNP, and more HMIs that are directly connected to systems. Down to level 1, we got a couple things going on here. This is where we see the hardware that we think of as the PLCs and field devices, the fun stuff that you can go buy on eBay that's 50 or 20 years old for $500. That was originally $100,000, as in been making advanced polymers until they DRMO'd the product, right? So, and this is another thing that's real key here is where we start finding our safety systems. These are what I kind of refer to as the control system. This is what shuts down a control system that has gone out of control, that has gone out of bounds, and risk to a life safety issue. And these are kind of strange systems that a lot of times get put in place. They're certified, and no one touches them. They get left alone. They're usually pretty good about them being air-gapped, but we see very deep maintenance cycles for these type of systems just because of the amount of effort and the risk that comes with maintenance of them. So here we are again. So you kind of want to be a researcher in the ICS field, and I think that's awesome. And I definitely wanting to hear from everyone, their opinions on this, but kind of be prepared for the long haul. I want to cover these models right here. So you got the Purdue model there on the right, and on the left is the DHS defense in depth model that you should ideally be modeling in your OT environments, but I bet no one does. And essentially, this network topology is the Purdue model laid over on your network. And as you kind of guess, the deeper you go into the network, we get more critical applications and pieces of hardware. So as a researcher or an asset owner, it becomes a little more difficult to work with these devices as you descend these models. The level of expertise that's needed increases significantly, and the potential expense for these systems go up as well. So that should kind of be being factored into your disclosure process. And I tried looking back at some of our FY18 data, and we had we have that 45-day disclosure process policy, but we averaged about 190 days for disclosure, and to try to strip out some of the outliers, I did the median on that, and we were closer to 120 days. So I'm guessing from an IT perspective, that disclosure is probably a lifetime, but in the operational technology realm, it seems pretty reasonable. I know some folks would definitely argue me on that one, but you know, and as I mentioned before, we did find that most of our vendors have about a 60-day disclosure policy, and want to remediate as quickly as possible, but still, you know, that's 120 days on average to get these findings straightened out. And something to keep in mind when you're looking for a system to focus your research on is whether or not it's a regulated device. We do see devices in the ICS realm that are regulated. Specifically, a great example is the Schneider Electric system, the SIS system that was impacted by the Hatman Triton Trisys malware. There was actually a delay in getting the patch out because of the need to have it recertified by the safety board there. And so I kind of wanted to see if I could correlate if the disclosure process was impacted by where the system resides in the Purdue model. And it wasn't something that we're explicitly tracking, but I did find a subset that I was able to identify that existed in 3 discrete areas, all in one package, and it was medical devices, right? And the good news is the medical devices, on average, followed the same trend as the ICS realm. On the median, though, I found it was about 5 to 10 days longer for the disclosure process, but that was because we allow the FDA in these disclosures to review the risk, because we're not doctors at DHS. We give them the opportunity to provide the input on the patient safety impact. So I think I'm running out of time pretty quick here. Let me wrap this up. So if you want to start researching ICS systems,
you're going to have your diet ginger ale or your ginger beer, or you can mix them together, but you can't have your diet ginger ale. This is Vegas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There was a rider in there, and I went for some for diet ginger beer, but apparently that was too much. So
that's not me. It's the town.
All right, so awesome. So you want to be an ICS researcher, that's great. And you think you found something that may be significant, even better. Please bring it to me. I want to get you a CDE. I want to get this information in front of vendors, but ultimately I want to make this information available to asset owners, because those are the individuals that are responsible for remediating these findings. This whole process is no good if the asset owner doesn't find out about it in the end to fix these issues. So I think I'm out of time, but a quick story. I've been on 3 assessments with DHS, and they were all ICS focused. They round up pretty easy. There's one, it was terrible, it was scary. The second one was, what was that? Oh gosh, was meh.
D-I-E-T. There you go.
Oh man.
Enjoy.
Thank you. So this one asset owner we went to, they were doing great. They were doing everything right. They were checking logs. They had their network segmented. But we start to walk the plant, and we find a PLC box unlocked. Not great. No big deal. We find the program key in the program mode in the box. That's bad. That's bad, but it happens a lot. And we were like, well, you know, this is probably going to be a finding. And they were like, okay, we appreciate it, but we haven't done maintenance in 5 years on this anyway, so we'll get around to it eventually. So that's to the tune of $30,000 an hour for these guys. So this maintenance and patching effort is a significant process for these asset owners and individuals. So you try to factor that into your disclosure process, and I'm getting the no really stop now message. So I guess I can take questions, but no really stop now. We can continue this conversation over at the Platinum. We're having a coordinated disclosure discussion over there. My boss is there, and if you tell her how terrible I am at this, maybe she won't make me do it again. So, thank you.